What's up, guys? Welcome back to OverTakes. This is Misfit, and today we're going to be talking about the Western Division play-ins. So we're going to break down the two matches that we know are going to happen, and then hopefully my predictions are going to be better than they were for APAC, which literally the team I said has no chance won, and the team that I thought was the best. Anyway, we're going to talk about the play-ins and get ready for the playoffs. But first, before we do that, thank you very much for joining me. All of you guys have been supporting me. Thank you very, very much. It's greatly, greatly appreciated. And if you're new, joining me for the first time, I do Overwatch League content anywhere from 2 to 3 times a week, depending on what's going on. We got the play-ins going on. There wasn't much happening elsewhere or whatever. I didn't feel like we needed a review last week because there were a couple of games that mattered, and it was really done when we started with London taking care of business and keeping the Defiant in the play-ins. So the only thing that happened was the Mayhem miraculously won 2 games, and it wasn't that much, but they did enough to get themselves into the 7th spot, and they take on Boston instead of Toronto. Let's dive into the 2 matches that we know are going to happen. So we have, starting off today, we have Boston taking on Florida, and then the next match we have Washington taking on Toronto. These matches are both kind of up in the air, honestly. If you look at the way these teams play, it's really hard to get a grasp on who you could say is better. Unlike what I thought was going to happen in the East, where I was like, well, Chengdu, they're going to fold against Guangzhou because Guangzhou's playing so good. Hangzhou has the Chang'un factor, which is going to screw everything up. But literally the opposite happened in the East. I feel as though that these teams are much closer in the West, no matter what happened in the East. Because, as I learned, whatever you think is going to happen is not going to happen on script for APAC. Let's just put it that way. Let's talk about what we got going on right now. We have Mayhem versus the Boston Uprising and the Toronto Defiant versus the Washington Justice. We're going to talk both matches, and then we'll do a little crystal ball thing. Hopefully my crystal ball is not as cloudy as it was for the APAC region. But let's talk Mayhem Boston. Now, these teams have met a couple times. They're both kind of scrappy. You don't know what you're going to get from them. They cannot beat the upper echelon teams unless certain things happen, fall into their lap, whatever you want to call it, metas, whatever. But they're dangerous teams, and they have players on these teams that can take over games on certain heroes, and they're not bad, but they're not up in the upper echelon like I was saying. So what am I expecting from this match? It's really hard to pick this one, honestly, because Boston and the Mayhem kind of are, like, I feel that they're on the same level. They have the same kind of vibes. There are moments when you watch these guys play and players that can take over matches, Hydron, and, someone has moments. And on Boston, you have guys like, Valentine makes big plays. Victoria makes big plays. You have different players doing things. I feel like Punk and whoever they put in for tank on Boston and someone kind of share in they're good, but they're not upper echelon, but they can surprise you and do different things. They have a wide hero pool. There's a lot they can do. I really like what Boston's support line can do a little bit more than the Mayhem. I see this all the time, and it sounds like I'm being like some kind of weird shill. I'm a Mayhem fan, so I have a little bias towards the Mayhem, but I'm also objective about them. I like Boston's support line a little bit better. Mostly it falls on Crimzo. I think Crimzo is, over his career in the Overwatch League, which took him longer than it should have to get in, I think he's underrated. And I think he can do a lot of things for them, especially if we do this Bap Lucio thing. You get him on I like him on the Baptiste. I like him on the Ana. I really like what this dude can do. One of the things that I think the Mayhem going in their favor is Hydron playing Sojourn has been filthy. And I also think Checkmate, if you run him on Tracer, Sombra Tracer's kind of, I'm not the biggest fan of that, but, it works in certain situations. Especially if you get like body shots in on Sojourn and he can come in and clean up, stuff like that. It looks pretty good. The Genji play is okay from Checkmate. I'm not sold on it. Genji's going to get nerfed. It's not as big as everybody thinks, but that's a story for a different show and probably not my show. But all in all, I'm finding this match very intriguing. These teams are all close in record, and it's not necessarily skill level and on paper kind of stuff, because on paper you would say Washington's better than all four teams, but as we know, that doesn't work out. But I'm going to call this as a close match. Here's why. If you go across the board on these lineups and the heroes they play and how they've been playing of late, not counting the Junker Queen meta and all that stuff, that was a whole anomaly. But in the last stage, the Mayhem can kind of nut up, and when their backs are against the wall, they play really, really well. Their backs are against the wall in this. I just feel like there's certain guys on that team, like someone, and I feel like Checkmate is another one of those guys. They have this just edge to them in a big match when their backs are against the wall, when they're not entirely outmatched, like playing San Francisco or the Glads or someone like that. When they're playing on the level of teams like this, they do really, really well. So how I'm seeing this match, I like Florida in a close 3-2. I really think Boston has a shot to win this, but I think in the end, the tournament experience that the Mayhem have is going to come out and kind of bring them the victory. Also, I feel like, as much as I like the sports from Boston playing a little bit better than the Mayhem, I feel like some of the aggressiveness that Slide Surmajed, Onimo, the way they play in this meta, if they go into that Zarya, Lucio, BAP thing with pick your poison on DPS, most likely with Hydron, you're going to be playing Sojourn. And somebody, Genji, Tracer, whatever else you want, Sombra, whatever you're running. I just like the way it looks better, the way they played of late. They beat Houston. Houston, you could say Houston wasn't trying. They were trying to flesh out metas and see who's good and what's not. But the Mayhem stepped up last weekend, and I think they're going to step up this weekend too. I think they're going to beat the Uprising 3-2. Now, next match. This match is harder than the last one to pick. Washington, we know the story. We know the story of the Washington Justice. That when you get on their side, they're a dumpster fire, and when you lose your faith in them, they rise up and beat somebody. One of the major factors with this team, no matter what happens, is Decay. If Decay is focused, ready to go, and I am assuming he will be in this playoff scenario. If you have Decay on his A game, you're not going to beat the Washington Justice. Plain and simple. It doesn't matter what they do otherwise, he will fuck you in the end. He is that good. But Toronto has stepped up in the last two stages. Yeah, okay, you can say what you want about the Junker Queen meta and all that. They've been middling throughout the year. Sometimes bad, sometimes better than advertised. If this team, Toronto that is, can run the Zarya with the BAP and the Lucio, and then you let Hisu do whatever Hisu wants to do, whether you have him on Sombra or Ashe or whatever you want to do with that. It's going to be a rough day for Washington. But at the end of the day, though, Washington, it all focuses on Decay. The other parts matter, yes. If Kalios is ready to go, playing like he has in a couple of these matches against quote-unquote better opponents, yeah, okay, end of the stage, whatever you want to call it, whether they were ready or not, if Kalios can play tank reasonably well. I think the Justice can win this. This is, for me, I'm going to go out on a limb here. Yeah, people can say I hate on Toronto, but I'm not hating on Toronto right here. If the Justice, which has been the overwhelming arc of the Washington Justice for the whole year, if the Justice can focus and play their game against Toronto, they will beat them. Because if you let Decay out of your sights for 1 second, he's going to take over the match. And I think he could do that. But the one thing that is going to be prevalent in this match is how good the Toronto Defiant support line is. And you could say what you want about how supports play or whatever. But Chorong and Twilight are amazing. And if they can do anything remotely close to what they normally do, they might have to go above and beyond in this match, in my opinion, because I think Washington is getting into their stride, so to speak. They could be a nightmare for Washington, especially, if you get them on the heroes that they're good at. And they're good at so many. But if you run the Lucio Bap thing, you got Chorong on Lucio, you have Twilight, who's an underrated bat player. Everyone knows him for his Ana and some of the Zen stuff he's done, but he's a really good bat player too. If they run Lucio Bap, do what they normally do, they could take over this match. Not take over. They could sway this match to the side of the Defiant by just keeping Kalios up, enabling Hisu. They can do what they've been doing all season long, and that's keeping this team in matches. I mean, sometimes people can say what they want about support lines and this and that. They if you look at some of the teams that have gotten to finals and to certain points in the playoffs, close to finals or whatever, you look at the Fusion when they had Alarm and Funny Astro. Those two didn't carry them necessarily, but they did things like keep Sato from fucking failing like he had done in the past, because they kept him alive. And they also contribute to the fight. Very, very important in Overwatch 2. When you're playing support, you have to do damage as well. So these two guys know very well how to do that. And it's a tough call. But I'm going to go in this, honestly, I'm going to go against my better judgment, because I have no judgment on either one of these teams that's been right. So I'm going to go against my better judgment and pick Washington 3-1 in this. I know you guys are saying, oh my God, all year long, you've been railing the Justice. But I think this is their point where they can show people what they're capable of and do what they're capable of. And I think they're going to advance on to the next round. So where does that bring us? All right, we'll go with the winner's bracket first. Washington Mayhem. Okay. These matches are all weird because these teams are good, but they're not great, so you can't focus on one thing. I am going to focus on the one matchup that I think is going to be the biggest for this round if we get there. And that's going to be, to me, Decay. And if you look at previous matches with Washington and Florida, Decay has taken over the match. And I think he's going to do that. They've lost in one of them. But I think what's going to happen here is we're going to have Washington doing what they do and just letting loose their DPS. Because their DPS, honestly, as much as I love Checkmate and Hydron, or if they decide to put an Xe in or whatever's going to happen, I really like the Washington DPS better. I feel like their support lines are on the same level. Florida's being crazy aggressive and stupid sometimes, to a fault. I think the tanks, I would lean on someone over Kalios a little bit, but it's the Decay factor. So I'm going to say Decay. The Washington Decay win. The Justice win, and they secure their spot into the playoffs. That sends Florida down, waiting for the next match, which we have Toronto-Boston. This match, to me, is a little bit more clear-cut. I like Toronto. I just didn't like them against Washington. I think it's a bad matchup for them. I'm going to go with Toronto 3-1 in that, solely on support line, plus Hisu, plus Hotbud playing characters that he's really good at, heroes, whatever you want to call them. I'm going to go there. Boston has nothing to be ashamed of in this if they get knocked out. Some people are going to be disappointed in their performance, but I think they did better than a lot of people said. Or right at the level where we thought they should be. I'm kind of they're right at the level where we thought they should be. But I think Toronto moves into the loser final. Losers bracket, whatever you want to call it. So I already have Washington in. Now we have Florida, Toronto. My two favorite teams in the Overwatch League, ironically. Picking this one, it was, trying to figure out, looking at it, going through it, and as much as I have railed the Toronto Defiant this year, I am going to pick them to go over Florida. And here's why. I think the meta suits them right now at this moment before we get into patches with Kariko and nerfs to Genji and whatever else is going to happen. The nerf to Genji I don't think is as big globally as people want it to be. People are losing their minds like they usually do with that stuff. I just feel like Toronto is more complete right now, more ready to win right now. I feel like Hotba has an advantage over someone. I feel like Hisu is playing better than I expected. I will give him that. And their support line, far and away, better than the Mayhems. So I'm taking Toronto to go to... So my two picks to go to Anaheim are the Defiant and the Washington Justice. All right, guys, so there you have it. Those are my two picks. I got Washington and Toronto going in. The two teams you guys would never expect me to pick because I fucking loathe the way they play, mostly because I expect more out of them and whatever. But I think this is where these two teams step up. They get themselves into the playoffs, and we'll see what happens from there. We'll obviously discuss that way more in the next week. And I'm going to do a full-on award show coming up next couple of days. We'll have it maybe over the weekend. And we'll talk about that. Get ready for the playoffs. We have kind of a week off. We just don't play on the weekend. We play on the following Monday, kind of like we did with the Mid-Season Madness. I'm ready to go. I want to see who our first champion in Overwatch 2 is going to be. It's going to be fun. I'm ready to go. And we'll talk more about it as the week goes on. I'm going to do a full breakdown of kind of a power ranking, if you want to call it, going into the playoffs. We'll pick matches to start, and then we'll update as the week goes on. We're doing matches all week long on playoff week. So we'll talk more about that later. I'd like to thank all you guys for joining me. Thank you very, very much for all of your support. It's greatly, greatly appreciated. If you're new, thanks a lot. Watching the whole video. If you could hit a like, hit a subscribe, that'd be fantastic. Helps me out with the algorithms and all that kind of YouTube jazz. This is Misfit. I'm out. Everybody stay safe, have a good rest of your day, and I will talk to you on the next one.